Hello COP26, hello Glasgow, Jordan's on the line. Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to make this quick because we don't have much time. Here in Jordan, weather patterns are getting more extreme. We have drought for most of the year, and then when the rain does come, it falls harder than ever before. Cities like Petra are being hit by devastating floods. Homes are destroyed, livelihoods are wiped out, and the cost of recovery is often enormous. We cannot just wait for things to get better, and we won't. Here's the thing, this isn't some impossible challenge. We know what needs to happen. As part of the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance, we are working closely with communities to manage flood risks and ensure that they are as prepared as possible for the next one. This feels like a good time to remind you that the cost of preventing a flood is way less than the cost of recovering from one. So why wait? You know where to find us, so give me a call. Bye. Assalamu alaikum.
Hi everyone. That was just a quick video from one of our teams in Jordan around our flood resilience program that's funded by the Zurich Alliance. I think we're just at time, so I think Dorothy and I will just do a quick introduction and then we'll crack on with our speakers. And we've got a few people in the waiting room and we'll let them in. So hi everybody, I'm Lizzie Whitehead. I work for Mercy Corps. I'm a climate advocate and I work on the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance program. And let me introduce you to Dorothy, who's done all the hard work for today.
Definitely not true, but hi everyone. My name is Dorothy Heinrich. I am technical advisor at the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center. And yeah, Lizzie and I have been working to put this session together, but we want to keep it very informal. You know, the chat is open if you have any questions or there's things you want us to ask the speakers. So we're really keeping this, yeah, an open door. We're kind of pretending as if we were in person as much as possible. So maybe Lizzie, you want to play the video again, just as people are cycling in? But yeah, so feel free to put your names, organizations in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from. We're very excited. There's a lot of people, I think, tuning in on the event platform itself. So there's going to be double, like half of the people probably in the Zoom room, and then a bunch of people on the event platform. So we're going to see how that goes. Okay. But yeah, so welcome. Just as people are cycling in, we'll do this.
Sure, we'll give them a few minutes and we'll just play Jordan.
Yeah, beautiful.
Hello COP26, hello Glasgow, Jordan's on the line. Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to make this quick because we don't have much time. Here in Jordan, weather patterns are getting more extreme. We have drought for most of the year, and then when the rain does come, it falls harder than ever before. Cities like Petra are being hit by devastating floods. Homes are destroyed, livelihoods are wiped out, and the cost of recovery is often enormous. We cannot just wait for things to get better, and we won't. Here's the thing, this isn't some impossible challenge. We know what needs to happen. As part of the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance, we are working closely with communities to manage flood risks and ensure that they are as prepared as possible for the next one. This feels like a good time to remind you that the cost of preventing a flood is way less than the cost of recovering from one. So why wait? You know where to find us, so give me a call. Bye. Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks, Lizzie. Thanks so much for everyone who's been joined while that video was playing. It's nice to see you in great numbers and trickling in as well. Welcome again to this session. We're kicking off DNC Days today, looking at the impacts of climate change on extreme weather and on the use of early warning systems and early action plans to help prevent the biggest impacts of these hazards. So it's kind of today, yeah, welcome to the session. Co-hosted by the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center and the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance. I think we're getting to numbers here. So if you want to just put your name and organization in the chat and also tell us a little bit about your experience as well with the principles of early warning and early action. It would help us to know who's in the room and what expertise is here. In particular, we're curious, why do you think we're talking about early warning, early action at COP? And why do you think this is important? So please feel free, pop that in the chat, let us know who you are. And as we do that, I'm going to get started as well and introduce our first speaker. I'm very pleased and honored to introduce Dr. Michael H. Glantz from the University of Colorado Boulder, the Consortium for Capacity Building. Mickey is, for some of you in the field, will really know him from we'll know him from the range of publications and kind of central role that he's played in developing the concept of early warning systems, in kind of entrenching these questions of usable science, what it means to use forecasts, observations, monitoring for early warning systems. How do we link this with action? And so he's going to give us a talk right now entitled Earliest Warning, Earliest Action in a Changing Climate. So welcome again one more time. Mickey, I'm going to share your slides and we'll get started. And as well, everyone, just please feel free to pop questions you might have for any of the speakers in the chat. We're going to hopefully get to them at some point during the session, either at the end of each speaker or at the end. Yeah, so wait a sec, I'm going to share my screen. And Mickey, I'm going to send this over to you.
Okay.
Everyone see my screen?
Oh, there I am.
There you go.
Okay. Well, I've had about 5 variations of this talk, I have to tell you. And the last one was done in the last couple hours. It's just too much to say. Early warning systems it's like an industry now. And there's just so much good stuff out there. And actually there's a lot of room for finding new things. So when I got asked to do this, I started off by looking at EWS. That's what, EWS, that's early warnings, or with little s is plural. So I started to think, I always use EWS, but then I thought, what if I came at it from the other side, where it was the system first and not the early first? So I did that, and that was going to be my first talk. I'm not going to go through the 5 variations, but that was my first thought. So is it different if you go the other way? And it turns out, yeah, I got some new insights actually, and I'm old. So there was some use in flipping it around, and I'll get to some of that stuff. But so what I want to say is every society in the world has its own unique set of threats. And people want to get, they want to know what's coming. And sometimes governments definitely want to know what's coming. And sometimes they don't want to share it with the public. They want to know, but they don't want to share it with the public. So there are a lot of weird things that go on with early warning systems. They all work in PowerPoint, okay? Everyone is successful. But in practice, they aren't when you try to apply a lot of stuff and you dig a little deeper. So they all have their threats. Some of those threats are natural. Some of those are human-induced. We're getting more human-induced impacts on the environment. They're what I call creeping environmental problems. Almost every problem humans get involved in is a slow onset problem, for which there are no thresholds readily identifiable, okay, until you cross it. And that's that problem that Jordan mentioned, the person in Jordan. It's cheaper to prevent something than to clean it up. And so a lot of our problems are very expensive because we are creating them, but don't care. Today is like yesterday: air pollution, soil erosion, deforestation, whatever. Almost every problem, ozone depletion, it's like nothing. Yesterday was like today, tomorrow's like today. In 5 years, it's a crisis. but I don't know where that threshold is. So we get to, with this early warning notion, warnings don't just come as warnings. They can come as a scenario, they can come from history, they can come from trends, and from just signs in the environment. Many people don't respond until, and that's the CO2 problem, the global warming problem. It's a little hotter today than it was yesterday. Jordan 10 years ago, they were creeping towards where they are now. We're all moving slowly towards these thresholds and crossing them. So this is a definition by UNISDR on early warning system. And you can see it's got a set of key words in it. Almost, I would argue, most definitions of early warning systems have a certain number of common elements. Create a warning, they create the warning, disseminate the warning. It's got to be timely and meaningful, enable those at risk to prepare, to act. That means some lead time, insufficient time to reduce harm and loss. Okay, so those elements are generally in all these definitions. If you go to slide 3, this one, I use this slide because I like it. I was an engineer in my early life for a short time. Then I went over to political science and social science now, multidisciplinary throughout all. And if you look at this chart, it's very interesting because it's a survey. Can you hit, I think there should be another piece to that slide. Yeah. So this is what people think. This was a survey done with students by one of the top, in fact, I think Baruch Fishoff shared a Nobel Prize for statistics and probabilities. And you can see these words, these qualitative terms, and how classes of undergrads define the probability to that. So if you look at possible, it ranged from 0.1 probability to 0.9. Okay, so we give a warning, and we know what we mean, but then people listening are going to interpret it differently. So we have to keep that in mind with early warnings, that one warning does not fit everyone's needs. So that's something to keep. And this phrase on the side is actually from politics. And that's useful to know. It's not what you say that matters, it's what they hear. So you have to think about your audience and who you're talking to. And a lot of times, I've used words in lectures where the scientists would complain that little fish, instead of the proper technical term. And but the public understood it, and that's who I was talking to. I wasn't talking to the scientists where you put on the jargon hat. So we have to keep that in mind. I look at analogies. Let's see. I look at early warning system as there are a lot of analogs or analogies for early warning systems, and one is a chain. So the phrase, a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And so you have this chain of activities, and each stage in the system, you produce the forecast, you distribute the forecast, you build the processes that deliver the forecast, you share relevant information, and you ensure that people get it and understand it. Okay, and then there's what's usually left out is the feedback loop to tell the forecasters what they're doing is what you want to hear, and it's in good form and useful. So what you have are really they're two disparate communities. They're in silos. The forecast world, they're in a silo. It's the stuff, and they talk to each other, and they understand probabilities and all that. They talk to each other in scientific terms, and they produce a forecast. And in the old days, they would just put out the forecast to the government, to the media, etc. And then people would have to interpret it in their own ways. And so that's because people who are in that world of statistics and math and physics, they're comfortable. That's their comfort zone. And then what's going on now is the WMO, World Meteorological Organization, they're trying to get forecasters in the National Met Services and Hydrologic Services to reach out to society, not just hand off a forecast and say, have a nice day. This is what we think is going to happen. Have a nice day. But we're also now having to tell you something about the impacts. Now, I'm a social scientist, been doing this multidisciplinary stuff for 2 centuries. I can't remember when I started, but for a long time. And whenever we did the social, we had to know something about the physical. But it's not necessarily the same the other way. The ones who do the physical are happy there, okay? And now we're asking them to go out of their comfort zone, but government's not giving them more money to do so. So they're working, they have more tasks to do some things they really aren't comfortable doing. Some are, many aren't. And that's the situation. So what happens is a forecast is handed off to society, and the emergency managers and humanitarian organizations then get the forecast and work with it. But what I came out with by reversing the order of the EWS versus SWE, you know, where early became the last thing I talked about. And it turns out, to me, something I kind of hadn't thought much about, I just knew it was there, and that was lead time. People who are warned need lead time. People who are making forecasts want to give you the lead time, as much lead time as they can, but they're constrained by the science. They can't give you often precise information. So they talk in probabilistic terms, which gets you back to that other slide, which shows that a lot of people don't understand probabilities. In my county, people will say, oh, I don't rate the forecasters very high, 50%. Half the time they're right and half the time they're wrong. Why? Well, because they said it was going to rain in the county last week and I didn't get wet. Well, it didn't rain over you, but it rained somewhere else in the county. So they see themselves as 90% correct, and we think they're 50% correct, you see. So this is a problem. And what I've come to believe is that we have to work towards increasing lead time. Science is constrained. Society is less constrained, actually, because it's human nature. It's humans. You know, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do this. I don't want to do this, I want to do this. So it's a whole different balance. And while a lot of the attention is on forecasting a hazard, less funds, less goes into how to shore up the social side, to expand that lead time. So you don't see, like we saw with California and the fires, you know, you see the fires miles away on other hilltops, and there's always that family that's the fires at the top of the hill coming down towards the house, and they're looking for the kids, the dog, and they're jumping in a car and driving through flame to escape. Why didn't they react when it was coming towards them? And there are a lot of reasons for that. So some of those reasons are this. There are people who are risk averse, and they will get a warning and they'll hop on it right away. They'll do something. Nope, no, stay there. so they'll do something right away. They'll start to pack up the cars, take whatever they have to do. They're going to get ready, go to a motel, whatever, whether it's a flood or whatever it is, a fire. Others are risk takers. So they say, no, they're always wrong. I'm going to stay. The hurricane's coming. I'm on the coast. It's 150-mile-an-hour winds. I can do it. My house can do it, that kind of stuff. And usually they wind up at midnight calling for help, okay? And so others have to put themselves at risk in order to save them, if that's even possible. So I came up out of this thinking about warning systems is, how do you appeal to that cluster of people who hesitate to respond to the first forecast? We talk about early warning, but the early warning isn't just a one-off, maybe for a flash flood or tornado. You have very little time. But for some of these events, you have some time. So they wait, like for an El Nino, you wait. There's the first forecast. I'll wait till the next one. I'll wait till the next one. I'll wait till the next one. And finally, they're in trouble. So I think there has to be more than one kind of warning system. And what I've suggested, and no one listens, but I've suggested that there be a late warning system. At some point, you have to ratchet up the volume. You have to ratchet up the urgency in the terminology. This is it, or you're on your own. Something that would catalyze that. Now, the idea of, and this phrase actually, I had not come across it, but we wrote a paper about it, and it was inspired by the COVID situation, where we're hearing all about COVID hesitancy. Never thought about it. From my standpoint, there's a vaccine, there's something going on. I'm going to take the vaccine, or a medicine, or whatever it is. So I'm risk averse in that regard. And then I started to realize, hey, I always hear that the villagers don't trust the extension person when they're telling them how to plant, what to plant, where to plant, what not to plant, and they're taking all the risk as far as they're concerned, because if they get advice and it's wrong, they're not bailed out by the government or the extension service. But I hear this in whether it's little or a large farm, a mechanized farm operation, there's always this, I'm not sure about the forecast. I'm going to wait. So in the forecast world, we have hesitancy. Now, what the vaccine people did, they didn't define vaccine hesitancy till 2014. They've been dealing with plagues and all kinds of things, but it was realized that people are hesitating, just like we noticed that people aren't responding to forecasts right away. So what can we do about that? And maybe there should be in the WMO, in the Red Cross, somewhere, a group that pulls people together to see how they can improve the response to forecasts that are life-threatening or crop-threatening or health-threatening, cholera outbreaks, whatever. So I think that is something I'm very interested in. And we've written about this forecast hesitancy as a first shot. It really was inspired by the COVID stuff. I heard about it, but never thought we could do much about it. But I think we can, because if you find out why people are hesitating, some of those will always hesitate, but many will not. With good reason, you can convince them that they should be acting on forecasts. So for forecasters, it's a risky job. One of the things I think we need to do when it comes to handing off the baton, if you look at forecasting not just as a chain, if you look at it also in a different way as a relay race, where one runner runs to another and they hand them a baton and they keep running and they hand the baton until they finish the race. if you drop the baton, any fumbling with the baton, any being a little, you're going to lose the race. So my feeling is there should be more attention on making that connection seamless. So then I say, well, okay, who's in charge of early warning system? Who the holistic, no, wrong slide. I'll tell you when to do the slides, okay? When you look at this holistically, how do you go from the forecast monitoring all the way through to society receiving the forecasts and emergency managers operating and things like that? How do you do that? And there is no one that is the overseer of the entire system. So what happens is when you have a bad forecast or the event is worse than was forecast, people start pointing fingers at each other. The emergency managers didn't pick up what we were saying, or the forecast was inaccurate, or missed by something or other. So that is something I'm interested in, whether that handing off the baton from the physical scientists to the social scientists, both groups of which are in glass silos. They can see each other, they can wave to each other, they may be able to put something through a slot to each other, but they're really not integrated in any way. And it requires something that makes it a seamless operation. So lead time is going to be one of the key things. I'll have to see where I am here because the slides are moving faster than me. So, okay, can you go back to the El Nino slide? All right, now, I wasn't going to use El Nino. I do a lot of work on El Nino, but I wasn't going to use my stuff. But in this operation, I came to realize this is probably one of the better bridges between the present and the future for a lot of things. Okay, this is an irregular, they call it an interannual. El Nino comes and it goes. La Nina comes and it goes. And they say, well, that crosses 2 years. But it isn't every year. It's not like the seasons. You don't wait a year and you get spring again. You don't wait a year, you get fall, whatever. You don't know when it's coming. Between 2 years and 7 years, you'll get an El Nino. I'll focus on El Nino, but we can say there are things about La Nina as well. So this is working off of sea surface temperature changes in the tropical Pacific. So it's not just certain highs and lows in your region that affects your climate. It's stuff going in distant places, in the Arctic for some countries, in the Antarctic for other countries, in the Central Pacific, because they say that El Nino is the second biggest disruptor of the sea in the climate system to the flow, natural flow of the seasons. So what El Nino does in many places is give you the opposite of what you expect. So if you're having a summer and it's supposed to be productive and rainy and all that at a certain time, you get drought. It gets dry. And if it's dry, you're in a dry, you may get wet. So your dry seasons become wet, wet seasons become dry. Rule of thumb, not everywhere. But
Nikki?
You can see. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to click through your slides a little bit because I think we're a little bit short on time. Do you mind if I just click through the slides a little bit? I want to make sure that you manage to get through everything.
All right, go back to the El Nino then, and I'll do this fast. Okay, so I want to argue that El Nino is a bridge. Why is it a bridge? It returns every 4.5 years on average. Okay, so we had an El Nino X years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, a big one. We're going to learn how to respond. We saw what worked, what didn't work. It happens again. Some of the things we adopted didn't work. Some of the things did. So we're constantly being challenged as to how to cope with a variable, extreme climate. And so that's why I think El Nino is useful, because every 4.5 years, they have to review their goals. in climate change, we talk about adaptation. And to me, adaptation always required an adjective. So you don't adapt. It's not one and done with adaptation to climate change, because like best practices, they're great now. In 5 years, the climate's warm. So you have to move on. Okay, you have to review. El Nino makes you review your coping mechanisms every so often. And La Nina is in between. It's the same. So every couple of years, you're doing one thing or another. So if you go back one sec, I don't know where the slide or, okay, I threw in foreseeability.
I think we've just got about 1 more minute on this one, Michael, and then we're going to have to move on. Thank you.
Okay, then move on. Foreseeability is a good word. It comes from law. It applies to what we want to do. Go to the next. Okay, here's what's going on. The climate, the scenarios we were saying years ago that would happen in 2050 are happening now. They're happening in 2020. And the things that we think were going to happen in 2100 are going to happen in 2050. So everything is accelerating now, and the impacts, the future's here. Okay, that's basically my point.
I love that as a segue, Mickey. Thank you so very much. I think we're going to share Mickey's slides, because I think they're each of them has a PhD level content in there that we could unpack for decades. So I think we're going to share them at the end. And this is a super nice segue, Mickey, if you agree, maybe to segue to Mandira to talk about, now that we know what early warning systems, we kind of have a sense. Mickey's told us about systems and about kind of each component of this early warning systems, the system, the warning, the early. What happens to early warning systems? What happens to our thoughts about early warning, early action, when we know that climate change is changing the risk? It's increasing the magnitude, frequency of hazards. It's bringing new hazards to new places. And what happens to these systems that we've established in these ways of being, of doing, of acting on warnings, when the climate is changing and when these risks are changing? So I'm going to transition maybe, Lizzie, to Mandira, if you're ready. And I'm excited. We'll take questions at the end, and we'll bring Mickey back to answer any of your questions in the panel as well. Mickey, thank you so much. And especially, I don't know if anybody noticed, but Mickey's at 1:30 a.m. in his morning right now. So it's doubly impressive. Well, thank you so much. And Mandira, over to you now. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dorothy. And very good morning, good afternoon, and good night, I guess, to you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here at this particular session. Thank you for the kind invite. And what I'm going to talk about is more looking at, of course, the extremes and relating it to early warning systems that we have on the ground, and talk a little bit about climate change. So outline, will introduce you to the Kush Himalayan region, to some of you who are not familiar with the region, and also talk about my organization, the climate change impacts. Then I'll also go into the disasters a bit, and also see, what are the causes of some of the floods that we are seeing in the region, and some of the tools and techniques that have been developed over the years in terms of responding to floods, and what kind of systems that we have in place, and then provide you with kind of a summary to take a home message. So I'm from the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, and we are located in Kathmandu, Nepal. We are a regional organization, and we primarily work in 8 countries to support sustainable mountain development. We work in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, Myanmar, Nepal, as well as in Pakistan. And now when we're looking at the Kush Himalayan region, it is an area that stretches all the way from Afghanistan on to Myanmar, covering an area of, a region of about 3,000 plus kilometers. And here in this region, it is the source of 10 of the major rivers of this region of South Asia, I say. And this particular region is also known as the third pole because of the large mass of snow and ice that we have here. It's a global hotspot for disasters and also for biodiversity. And we have about 240 million people that live in this region that you can see here in the dark green area, as well as if you're looking at the downstream areas, the resources from this region supports more than 1.9 billion people. And now talking about climate change, what we are seeing here in terms of a study that ICIMOD had conducted together with a number of experts in the region as well as internationally, we see that the region, the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, is warming much more faster than other regions around the globe. And this report is available through the Hindu Kush Himalayan assessment, which was launched in February of 2019. And as you can see, the region is at least 0.3 degrees higher than the global average, and even varies in other regions. So you can see that the days are getting and nights are getting warmer. And likewise, you can see about the, in terms of the precipitation, we can see that more extreme precipitation is being experienced in this particular region. And when you look at it, it's about like 8 to 12% increase in precipitation, more extreme precipitation, and it's more erratic actually. So as we've been experiencing this year in many countries in the region. So I just want to draw your attention again to this IPCC report, the 6th report, and where you can see the variations of, the temperature as well as the rainfall, the precipitation, and see that with the various global scenarios, it gets even, worse as you go and look at those global scenarios, from 1.5 to 2 to 4 degrees, the global warming scenarios, you can see that it is rapidly in terms of precipitation also increasing quite a bit. That means more extremes and then also more floods, right? And then so here, again, from the IPCC report here, both for temperature and as well as for precipitation, you can see for these various scenarios how, it's getting more wetter. As you see, this is for a 10-year event, but often varies for 20-year or a 50-year return period. And you were looking at, for the current, at least 6.7% wetter. And then as you go to the 1.5 degree scenario, 10 on an, average about 10.5% wetter, but more in the region actually, which I showed you earlier, and then it varies accordingly. So what happens basically in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region basically affects more than 1/4 of the humanity. I mean, I told you nearly 2 billion people that these resources feed to. So we are basically the pulse of the planet. And as far as these scenarios are concerned, if you're looking at the 1.5 degree world, then we are losing, 1/3 of the volume by 2100. And if you're looking at, business as usual, or a 2/3 of the volume under the current scenarios will be lost. And then, so what does this mean? Basically, we're talking about, more snow melt, more runoff. That means there's more likelihood of having, more glacier lakes formation and more likelihood of glacial lake outburst floods. We're talking about need for better preparedness and need for better building of the resilience. Yeah, so this is just another slide here from the latest report from the World Meteorological Organization that shows the number of casualties for disasters in the region. And this is very true for floods alone also. So if you're looking at the typologies of disasters in the region, we see that flood alone accounts for more than 40% of all the disasters that's occurring here. And then when you're talking about it in terms of the economic loss, it's even higher. It's even more than 50%. And these figures vary, of course, on an annual basis. So we see that this is rising, is increasing. There's an increasing trend. And that 1/3 of all the disasters, like I mentioned, is from floods alone, but many of them are transboundary. So there's shared risks and vulnerabilities across borders. And here, I think I would like to bring to your attention that, we have differential impacts of disasters. So women are more susceptible to these hazards than men. And for causes of floods, yes, both natural as well as anthropogenic. We see that in our region, we have, the high intensity continuous rainfall, GLOF, like I mentioned, dam bursts, and then anthropogenic, which is causing more riverbank erosion, more floods, and also, urban floods is becoming a very big issue in the region, flash floods, for instance. Yeah, so there is a need for attention to looking into that in terms of what kind of early warning systems are required in cities, as compared to more riverine floods or more inundation type of floods. And here in this, you see these two photos here. These are from the events in October this year, October 20th, when we were in the midst of a festival celebration. There was a huge flood that came down and inundated a huge mass of land. And the primary, I call it, those that were really affected, the victims, I call it, were the farmers. Unfortunately, they had just basically, harvested, and some were getting just ready for harvest, as you can see in the figures. So again, and now for draw attention to some of the challenges, because here we are talking about cascading events, cascading disasters. And this is an example from this year, again, in March 2021, where there was a big flood that occurred in Chamoli, Uttarakhand, and this basically washed away many hydropower plants along the way, as well as, the more than 150 people were killed, talking about uncertainties also, and also the nature of the disaster in high elevation areas. And this is another example, the Melanche flood disaster in Nepal. And the origin of the disaster, it occurred very high up. But again, the impacts were seen in the downstream. There was some kind of early warning provided by the communities. It was from community to community. So when you look at it, the number of people that were killed were minimal. There were hardly a few handful of people that were killed because of the early warnings that were provided from upstream to downstream. Though no formal or early warning systems were in place, but there was huge economic loss. So, and another examples are the GLOFs, the glacial lake outburst floods that occur in higher elevations, where early warning systems are very much necessary. And these particularly transboundary early warning systems, because the hazard is in China, and then the devastation occurs in Nepal. So these are some of the challenges that we have. Now, in responding to this, there is this framework, the reducing risks and vulnerabilities, looking at how risk is a function of three elements: hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. So this is from the latest report on ocean and cryosphere, but again, adapted from what we saw on the special report on extremes in 2012. So early warning systems play a very important role in terms of minimizing these risks, for which, of course, we need partnerships. We need to have the knowledge base. We need to mainstream gender. Governance is a big issue. We need to ensure that governance is also addressed, and then also, take advantage of science and technology to take it forward. So here I gave an example of the innovation in terms of an end-to-end flood early warning system. I think we've heard from Michael quite a bit in terms of the end-to-end and the need to connect. He made it, said it very nicely. The early warning system is strong as the weakest chain in that, in that link. So therefore, we need to really strengthen each part of the early warning systems. And here we're looking at, various real-time sensors that collect the data and information, transmits it, and then using various techniques and methods, we communicate it down to the users for action. And I would like to draw your attention to this flood early warning system. I think Michael has nicely talked about the system itself, but this kind of gives a complete picture of how UNISDR sees or defines the early warning system as the four components. One is the risk knowledge component. The other one is more looking at the warning and the monitoring. The other component is looking at dissemination and communication. And the other one is looking at response capacities. I think risk knowledge is where we are talking about risks and vulnerabilities and exposure, where we need to define that. We need to, look at the types of maps, the hazard maps that are developed, and the risk information well informed to the people, the communities. Then monitoring, what are the parameters that we're monitoring? We're looking at rainfall, water level, and how that is being fed into the models that are there for flood forecasting. yes, science-based, evidence-based is important. So these parameters are very important to ensure that we have a good forecast in place, which is then provided for early warning and then disseminated it through various methods and modes, including radio, SMSs, mobiles, and then down to the communities. And then, like Michael just said, it's important that we look at the response capacity too, because if all the things here, the first 2, 3 elements are good, components are good, but if we are weak on the response capacities, then there is no action on the ground. So we have to be careful that all these are interlinked. And so this gives you, the whole framework, and also questions some of those components as to how to make it strong. For instance, like if you're looking at dissemination and communication, the question is, does it reach all those that are at risk, for instance, yeah? And how is it used? Yeah, is it actionable? So these kinds of things we need to also pay attention to. So ISIMOD has been working in a number of different levels. So this one example I give you is the HYCOS program. That's the hydrological cycle observing program that we work together with the WMO. And our motto was to make information travel faster than floodwaters. So here we worked with the countries, the hydromet agencies, particularly to strengthen the hydromet networks and also the data acquisition and transmission and use of some of these products. The focus was pretty much on capacity building. And then so some of these modernization includes, the real-time transmission of data and also access to some of the freely available data sets, like from the GTS, the Global Telecommunication System of WMO. So this is an example of the real-time data that DHM has. This DHM is the Department of Hydrology and Meteorology. And they have a number of different projects through which the department has upgraded their network, which is now capable of transmitting real-time data for early warning systems. So this is quite useful and very important for that these networks be put in place as well as managed and operated. So this is an example of the regional flood outlook that we have. And this is, again, here in the, this particular figure, you see some of the red dots here. And this is showing you the danger level. This was actually during the floods in October, and some of the events, basically showing you that the water level is getting above not only the alert level, but also danger level. So this was through the modeling
we've
that
just
we were
got
doing.
about 1 minute left. Thank you.
So then we have this different other products on the tools, like the flood hazard tools, as well as the modeling tools that we have. And this is an example of how early warning is disseminated by the Department of Hydrology and Meteorology in Nepal, and using various modes of communication. And this is an example of how they are disseminating using, alerts, as well as using Twitter and Facebook. But this is an important slide, because this is where the communication is one of the weakest link, actually, when you talk about last mile connectivity and getting it down to the users. So it's not about only getting that information awareness, it's also making sure that the communities understand it, they accept it, and then there is an action on the ground. So this is extremely important. So thus, I just want to summarize. I think technological advancement has made it possible to put early warning systems in place. Effective early warning systems needs communication as systems, and resilient infrastructure is needed for risk reduction. We also need to enhance the capacity of different levels of users, so that they need to use it. And also the effective institutional mechanisms is a must, multi-stakeholder partnerships. It's not only about getting the information, but who informs how, so that institutional mechanism is a must. In many examples that have happened in the past, the institutional mechanism was very weak. Thus, to go forward with flood resilience, we suggest that risk-informed early action, for which we need to integrate risk information into these early warning systems. We need to also look at impact-based forecasts, and capacity and institutional mechanisms need to be enhanced. And then we should also pay attention to land use planning and zoning, because many times, these are not looked into, and often it's because of encroachment, people living in vulnerable areas that, they are more victims to these large-scale devastations. And then technology innovations using Earth observations as well as real-time data from in situ observations. And given the context that there is a lot of uncertainties, particularly keeping climate change projections in mind, short-term, long-term, we need to also plan for resilient infrastructure and also plan for a proper anticipatory action to respond to these various flood disasters, for which I think important in the region would be collaboration, partnerships, and cross-learning, and sharing of data and information is extremely important prerequisite to enhance climate resilience. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Mandira. You've covered a huge volume there. And if it's okay with you, we'll find a way to share your slides because there's a lot of detail in there that I'm sure people would want to come back to. Thank you. So you've heard from Michael and Mandira a huge amount of what the policy says, what the research says, but part of what we wanted to do today was really show you the real impacts from a kind of a person perspective. So I'm going to show you 3 very short videos. And those are from a couple of our partners. And then we're going to go into a bit of a panel discussion with some wider experts. So please do have any questions ready. I'm just going to share my screen. And the first video is actually from our partners in Plan International. So let me just play that video for you now.
No tenemos agua potable.
Dado a la escasez de trabajo está la escasez de recursos.
El año pasado, ¿verdad? Con las afectaciones de los huracanes que hubieron, pues quedamos incomunicados, no podíamos salir.
Pero se viene la corriente, rompe y se los viene encima, ¿va? Aquí no hay un lugar seguro en esta comunidad.
Se inundó todito aquí. Los de tren estaban demasiado arriba que me podía dar, como una niña, me podía dar una infección.
Hasta aquí todo se llena de agua, hasta allá. Y como no podemos venir a jugar, no podemos correr, ni estudiar, pues ya, por último ya ni estudiar, vienen los maestros, pero los alumnos no vienen.
Plan Internacional Nicaragua está desarrollando un proyecto de construcción de resiliencia comunitaria, el cual integra acciones encaminadas a fortalecer los sistemas de agua, saneamiento y alerta temprana, dotando a las comunidades de capacidades que le ayuden a enfrentar las inundaciones y la gestión de riesgo de desastres. De esta manera, fomentar la inversión social, política y financiera en el desarrollo de la resiliencia comunitaria.
Este lugar aquí es tan pobre, pero que la gente aquí solo vive. Lo que se gana en el día, lo gasta en el mero día, porque aquí no hay una fuente de trabajo.
Actualmente, ¿verdad? La sequía y las altas temperaturas están afectando porque el nivel del agua de los pozos está bajando. La tierra, por ende, ¿verdad? Está reseca, lo cual, ¿verdad? Los pocos cultivos que tenemos no logran desarrollarse.
Un tema que es muy sentido en las comunidades está relacionado al tema de agua y saneamiento, el cual se vuelve más complejo al momento de una inundación. Y esto tiene que ver en la gran mayoría porque las infraestructuras de pozos o letrinas son infraestructuras que ya dieron su vida útil.
Las consecuencias en la salud que hemos tenido en la familia a causa de contaminación de agua es que padecen mucho de diarrea y muchos parásitos. Ellos toman agua.
So in that video, we've heard about the impacts of flooding on education, on children, on health. They're also suffering from drought and extreme heat. And I'm just going to show you a bit of a video from Sierra Leone where they were managing a fire.
Sierra Leone, we have 2 seasons. You have the rainy season, the dry season. So the dry begins now that we are experiencing changes, but usually it begins in November and then up to April. So within that period, especially, so the peak hour is March, and that March is the hottest month in Sierra Leone. So any attempt of ignition can be disastrous. It is happening more, especially those informal settlements, like the slums area. Most of the areas where we have had fire incidents are those slums communities. On the 24th March, we actually got a fire outbreak in Susan's Bay, one of the slums community, highly overcrowded. So upon getting the news, we did a quick assessment together with the National Disaster Management Agency and other actors. So the assessment result revealed that 7,093 people, including children, were affected. And quickly, we provided some first aid services to injured people, psychosocial support, and then we pitched about 26 tents as a temporary shelter for the affected people. So during that period, we also deployed about 2 ambulances to refer people who are badly affected, and especially women who were due for delivery. About 10 pregnant women, we took them to the DSMH, and then we embarked on our.
And I'm just going to pause that there because of time, but 7,000 people affected by fire in Sierra Leone in an informal settlement. So dry season and some kind of incendiary kind of set off a fire that affected 7,000 people. And the last video is from our friends at Afghan Aid.
The shifting climate is making natural disasters more common and more severe, particularly floods and droughts, causing untold suffering and trapping rural Afghans in a cycle of poverty. Each year, natural disasters affect some 235,000 people across the country, taking lives and destroying homes, fields, livelihoods, and crucial infrastructure.
The floods come from up there in the mountains. You can see the valleys. Sometimes they come during the night and the village could be threatened. All of the men, women, and children would be crying. The flood swept away a baby from this village with the mother. The mother survived, but the baby was washed away.
The floods come down from the mountain and destroy our houses and agriculture. It gave us a real beating, and it destroyed our road.
Their stories are harrowing, but the means to protect Afghans against these threats are well understood.
And since that video's been made, obviously there's been huge changes in Afghanistan. But I think one of the points that we're also trying to make today is that early warning, early action is important in all places, but it's incredibly challenging to set things up in fragile states where some of the needs are highest. So hopefully seeing those videos and hearing some of those stories helps you connect with some of the information that Michael and Mandira have shared with you and some of the great research that's happening, but also kind of the reality of people's lives living with these extreme events. So let's spend the rest of our time with the wider panel. I'd like to bring in a few extra people. So if you can put your videos on. So we have Dr. Liv Stevens here from University of Reading. She also works with the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Centre. Thank you, Liz, for joining us. You've heard from Michael and Mandira, they're going to join. And then we also have Dr. Gigma, who is the technical advisor at the Climate Centre. Emmanuel, who is Early Warning, Early Action Officer at the Uganda Red Cross, and Samir Karaya, who is the Emergency Programs Coordinator with Concern. So thank you everybody for joining us. It's great to have you here. Maybe we should just pick up the question that came up earlier and then we can actually have a broader conversation. But Caroline had a question, which was a great one. She was asking that thresholds for early warning are often based on historical data. And Michael, I think, pointed out that we can't actually use that as a bit of an imprint for the future because IPCC reports and data have told us that extreme weather events are getting worse and more unpredictable. So if we can't use history to help us project early warning, how do we build in climate change into the design for early warning systems in the future? Liz, have you got a thought on that question from Caroline?
Sure, yeah, I think the first thing to say is that the science of weather forecasting is relatively robust to changes in the climate, and the forecasting models will see whatever event is coming up with the sort of same degree of skill or hopefully better in the future as we have now. So I think that's grounds for optimism. I think if we move towards impact-based forecasts, then we're less reliant on saying, oh, we're likely to see a 1 in 5 year flood event or something like that. If we're moving towards an impact-based forecast where we're talking about the number of people that are affected, then we kind of get around that problem. I think what I see as a concern is more about when we're providing warnings about unprecedented events. And we know that climate change is already bringing unprecedented events around the world. And I think when we forecast something that says, okay, this is a flood or a heat wave, the likes of which you've never seen before and has never happened before in an area, I'm not sure that people will trust that warning. And I think we need to think more broadly about how we support that. And I think some of that is thinking beyond just the early warning, but trying to use the full range of what in the science community we call seamless predictions. And that means forecasting for specific events, but also forecasting changes to climate averages, so seasonal forecasts, decadal forecasts, and longer term, so that we really understand what is possible in the future. And we use that to sort of, alongside our imagination, to understand what could happen in the future, so that when we do see a forecast of an event that is unprecedented and more than we've ever seen before, we're not surprised by it, and we can have already built those plans in place to deal with it. So I think that's the key point from my side, is around how we forecast those unprecedented events in future.
Thanks, Liz. Maybe Samir, we could come to you. I think you spend a lot of your time designing and delivering early warning, early action systems. What do you think is the biggest thing that's missing from people's brains, or the policy of the funders? What's your biggest blockage?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So in context where I work now in Somalia and Somaliland, I think the biggest missing we have is a national institutional mechanism of framework, due to weak governing system in country, and quite a large part is not even governed by elected government. So it's just like end of last year, we at government level were able to establish national early warning system, which is now completely done by government. So it's too early as of now. So that's why we rely on a lot of, let's say, community-based early warning system. And from organization level, we do take refer all these secondary sources, but then quite a lot reliant on community-based structure, which is in a way good, but again, lacks analytical information. For example, impact of La Nina. So all these global sources, they don't give you, because currently the country doesn't have its own system. So it mainly relies on all the system of foreign nations, so which lacks a district level analytical information about what could be the impact of this forecast on the district level. The second largest challenge we are facing as of now is like Somalia, Somaliland, both are rapidly urbanization. So almost like 50% population now living in urban area. And mainly all the people who are getting displaced, let's say due to drought or most recently desert locust upsurge and all, they all come to the big cities, including capital. Like capital alone is hosting more than 1.5 million displaced people. And most of this system we have currently, community-based system, they are mainly in the rural area or designed for rural community, which is more homogeneous or small administrative unit. So nothing really in terms of urban area, where at least half a population is living. So technically we are living like half a population out of reach in our design phase itself. And third we have is quite a lot conflict around, I can say that it's climate induced as well, due to like fighting over resources, particularly water and pasture and all. So there is nothing around early warning around conflict, everything is as of now around, let's say, floods or droughts, but conflict is one of the biggest reason of, let's say, displacement, and which climate has contributed as well. So we do not have something around that as of now. That's what we are working on. So in a way, the existing small scale system is also leaving like 50% of urban population out of reach and not addressing the core issue of country, which is like conflict and violence.
urban areas aren't really the first thing that come to mind when you think about early warning, early action. People imagine, some of the slides that Mandira was showing us and the kind of very remote telecommunication systems and speaking to people quite far away. But maybe, is there enough attention being drawn to urban areas? It sounds not from your experience, Samir.
Not really. That's what we are working on as of now. Like our community-based early warning system is in place since November 2019. So now we are working on improving methodology. And for example, a shock occurrence might be in a rural area affecting directly, let's say, pastoralist or agro-pastoralist community, but then they end up into the urban area when they get displaced. So actually the shock impact is also more on urban area, including, more stress on existing infrastructure or resources, which are already like in very poor condition.
Sure.
And that affects our longer term gain as well.
It slays things. Gigma, maybe we could come to you. What do you think are the greatest challenges that we face on early warning, early action? What's stopping you from doing a better job in your experience?
Yeah, I think that is to be too much honest, would be, first of all, a political will when it comes to most of the developing world countries. Actually, there is this issue of the governments to actually engage in that. There is some good reasons behind that. Of course, just as Samir was telling, there is this issue of conflict-affected countries. In many countries where climate is having strong impact on populations, we also have conflicts which also leads to climate, to migrations, but also vice versa, migration leading to conflicts. And climate is actually playing a big role on both of that. We have climate which can lead to conflict. We can have climate, we can have strong impacts on migrations. And there is a really big kind of mess between these two connections, which makes things quite hard. Another challenge, which I think is quite problematic, is the lack of skill in different organizations, mostly at the national level, because most of the time when it comes to implementing early warning systems for a given country, it is mostly for this system to be uptaken somehow by the national capacity which is in place. Unfortunately, it is often the case that the national capacity is not up to the task given the skill that they have at the present time. So I think these are some of the challenges I may highlight. There may also be some other minor ones, but I think that, I can just close with these two for the moment: the political will and often the lack of skill in national capacity.
Thanks, Gigma. And Sam, thanks for your comment and your question in the chat box. You're saying that a lot of the barriers and the bottlenecks seem to be with the capacity of local institutions. Emmanuel, maybe you could try and respond to some of that. Have you got any experience of where you've seen a real change in local institutions who have become stronger in delivering early warning, early action? Or is that still a challenge in the places where you work?
Yes, this is Emmanuel. I would say it's still a challenge. And from where I sit, I think the major gap is in the response capacity, one of the components that have been talked about. The early warning to complete the cycle and to make sense, there has to be the capacities to respond, to take some of the early actions to complete the full cycle. Because we are already still struggling with the impacts that we are facing for response. There is not enough resource to even do the response. And now the early warning is also coming into play. There is always a competing priorities in that. So that, in addition to some of the gaps that we still have in the monitoring component, like what it takes to really do the early warning, early action, you need a lot of systems, a lot of skills. Some of those systems that are needed to do the monitoring are not existing in some of these countries, these low developed countries where we come from. And the disasters are also changing. The disasters are really changing in nature, the magnitude and frequencies. So like we have flash floods in urban locations, which are not very easy to make predictions. They have very short lead times. So it needs systems that are up and running. It needs responsive system to the change in the risk and disasters. And I think those are still some of the major gaps here. But stakeholders are embracing collaborations and working together through the technical institutions in country, and then the different partners to see how they can address some of those gaps that are existing. But they still remain some of the critical challenges that we are always grappling with when we are doing with early warning and early action. Yeah.
Thanks, Emmanuel. And you raise an important point, because I think there's almost two different types of people that are involved in this. There's the humanitarian response post-disaster, and then usually the early warning, early action is the more longer term development professionals that are designing and trying to build capacity and do a lot of institutional strengthening. Maybe those two different types of stakeholders don't come together in their planning. That's not a very kind of normal space. Do you see some of the issues being on our side in terms of how we offer aid, how we finance early warning, early action, and how we kind of work together across that humanitarian development kind of spectrum? Is that part of the issue?
That's partly part of the issue, but there is also an issue of competing priorities. For example, as you're developing and setting up systems for early warning and early action, already disasters are happening and other communities are already grappling with the impacts. So they need to tap in the capacities already to do the response. And then the resources in terms of the human resources, the items need to do the response actions, and also the sources of these funds, both in country and even beyond the country. We are always running to the same like stakeholders for resources, for instance, for localized kind of events.
Thanks, Emmanuel.
So there is always a trade-off on what should be priority at this point in time. From the science perspective, we have evidence, and we say if you do early warning, this is how much you save. If you do early warning and early action appropriate, this is how much you can save. But the question is, how much resources do you have that can support both the early warning and action bit of it, and also already deal with the impacts of the disasters that you're already experiencing?
Thanks, Emmanuel. Some very, very difficult choices there, actually. Maybe if we turn it round a bit and think about what you've all experienced in terms of great solutions. There's a vast experience in the panel at all kind of parts of the design cycle and the delivery cycle. Michael, maybe we could come to you. What's your kind of nugget of hope? Where have you seen the most inventive change? You know, you talked about innovation and creativity. What example do you have of where that's been best in show? I think you're on mute, Michael.
Unmute.
Yeah.
You know, we all have comments on everything that's been said, but I wouldn't give up on history. You know, that's what we've got. And that's one of the things I mentioned about El Nino. You know, every 4 years, every 2.5 years, you're going to have to deal with a La Nina and El Nino, and you're going to get extremes, and some are going to be very extreme. But the near future is sort of like the recent past. We're not comparing now with 2030 or 2040. I don't know what's coming down the pike, and it's not necessarily good. One of the things about El Nino and La Nina, there's this debate starting, maybe, I don't know how long it's been going, but it's maybe 5 years. And is the global climate going to be more El Nino-like or La Nina-like? Okay, because you get different impacts. And if you can get a clue there, you can get a handle on what might be expectable. It's hard forecasting rare events. And rare events, you know, the WMO does this thing. I mean, I'm not a statistician, but they do this thing where every 30 years they change the average for the last 30 years, and that becomes your average. But if you went back to 30 years or 40 years ago, when they did the averages, things would be look a lot worse to a policymaker than just the difference between the last 30 years and adding 10 years and dropping 10 years. So I think we fool ourselves by not using the history. I mean, I wouldn't sell my house on it, but I think history is still. One British philosopher once said, "History has a future." trying to get people interested in being historians.
That's a good
The other
point.
thing is this end-to-end, one quick end-to-end bothers me. I always hear it, and Mandira said it, and I agree that there's an end-to-end, but what's missing for the public, you know, because I've been there when they started that phrase back in the 90s, and it's end-to-end to end. And the third end is the loop back from the people to the people making the forecasts and decisions that they have to live with. And you're often not listened to, that end. So make it explicit. That's all. It's there. And when you talk, it's there. And then, okay, just thought I'd throw that in.
No, it's great. And it reminds me of one of your first comments about it's not important what you say, it's important what they hear. So you could spout the best climate science in the world, but if you can't translate that in a way that makes sense, in the formats that make sense to all sectors of society who are most impacted, then we've failed. Mandira, maybe let's come to you. Where do you see some of the shining lights in the future for early warning, early action? What kind of hope do you have where you can see real change and real transformative change?
Well, I think what I've heard in the current discussion is quite promising. You know, when you're looking at early warning systems itself, of course, I kind of explained the four different elements, but there I want to, you know, primarily focus on three key issues, you know, three key areas, I guess. When you're looking at an early warning system, there is this technical component, there is a component on institutions, and then there is a component on social cultural aspects. So that the three makes the framework for early warning systems. So what we had done earlier was also to assess what the technical capacities were, what the institutional capabilities were, and what the social cultural aspects were. So currently, I think we are advancing in terms of the technical areas, in terms of generation of you know, the early warning systems. Yes, there can be room for improvement, I agree. But again, we have reached a level where their accuracy has increased substantially. Yeah, and then in the institutional part, we did hear the gaps. Yeah, that there are rooms for improvement, you know, in terms of how do we improve the governance in some of the countries that do not have that. And I think for particular events, there have been cases where governance has been weak, where the information was generated very well, but never reached the last, you know, user. So therefore, that governance bit, I think improving that would also be helpful in terms of, you know, looking forward in terms of making the early warning systems effective. And then the third component, that is the social cultural component. I think this is one of the weakest areas here when you're talking about early warning systems, getting down to the users, to the end users. And that's where I think understanding the language, their social cultural norms, their local issues, what kind of understanding they have is utmost importance. And there, in linking it to the early warning, and there is a lot of scope for, you know, including them early on in terms of the design also. I know, not only look at them as a beneficiary, but more look at them as a partner, as a co-creating that early warning. I think that's the direction we should go in terms of co-creating the early warning systems for it to be effective and impactful. So impact-based forecast, yes, but how do we make it impact-based? You know, understand the risks and vulnerabilities. So therefore, we do need to engage the, you know, the communities, the users right on from the beginning. And that's kind of the bright light I see. If we do that, there will be progress to what has already been done. I think there's been substantial progress, but there is a lot to still work for in terms of the anticipatory actions that need to take place for a safer world. Thank you.
Thanks, Mandira. And that point about the sociocultural, that's where we have evidence that actually you have to take a very gendered view as to how you design early warning, early action, and make sure that you're incredibly gender transformative in how you design those approaches. You'll get better outcomes. Liz, if we come to you next, where are you seeing some of the most exciting kind of futures in early warning, early action? What's making you excited in your job?
I think the most exciting thing I've been involved with recently actually bridges across the research work I do at the University of Reading through to the work I do with the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Centre, supporting the use of early warning systems in Bangladesh. And in 2020, there was an enormous humanitarian intervention on the back of a joint set of forecasts. So forecasts that came from the Global Flood Awareness System, which is funded by the European Commission's Copernicus Emergency Management Service, and the Flood Forecasting and Warning Centre forecasts, obviously based from out of that national capacity. We have a PhD student at the University of Reading who comes from the Flood Forecasting and Warning Centre, and he's really been working to understand the full range of decisions that are being made in the Brahmaputra floodplain when there is an imminent flood, through from supporting people on the Char Islands to evacuate very vulnerable communities living right in the floodplain, through to humanitarian interventions that need 14 days of lead time to be able to have their best effect. And I think what we've seen through that work, and something that Michael has mentioned, by linking back to the forecast producers, we can actually produce more relevant forecasts. So by working with people in country, we understand exactly what decisions are being made and how those global scale forecast products can support that. And I think previously those global scale products, as much as the European Commission will like to announce these sort of billion-dollar science investments, unless they are really informed by the decisions that are being made in country, they're not going to reach the number of people that they're supposedly going to reach. So I think that work in Bangladesh is a really good example of what can be done when you build those partnerships and nurture those partnerships to link across those different scales and different countries.
Great, thanks, Liz. I think all of us agree in the kind of localization agenda and trying to get decisions and funding to as local a space as possible. Maybe before I come to Gigma for your kind of hopes for the future, there's in Mercy Corps, we've just recently got some funding to try and work with some of the money transfer companies to try and look at options for getting money to communities that will be affected by extreme events as that kind of forecast happens. So if we know there's a massive flooding that's about to happen in a certain area, how can we work with kind of Western Union types to try and get money without some of the fees to the people who need it, so that they can finance their decisions, 2 days before a flood event, and hopefully try and reduce the impacts of that. So that's quite exciting for Mercy Corps. But Gigma, what are you seeing in your job? Where are you seeing some hope and maybe some innovation or creativity around some of these quite complex and intractable challenges?
I think my biggest hope is that currently, even in the developing world, when it comes to climate change and its response, it's no longer something that is just a matter of discussion between scientists only. We see now more and more the civil society in these countries involved in that. There is a demand, if not even a request to the different governments across the world to actually take action. And I think this is something very positive, because these people they do not want to just make the call, but they also want to be involved in this. They want to be part of this early warning system for their communities. And I think this is, I guess, the most important. It is what we need the most at the moment to move forward. In addition to that, and maybe coming back to this point, is that one of the issues when it comes to early warning system is obviously about the uncertainties. And Michael was also telling that what matters to people is not really what you are saying, but how they do understand the way you communicate the uncertainty. And hopefully science is getting a bit, it is improving. In the next couple of years and decades, we are going to reduce significantly the uncertainties that we do have across the different scales of forecasting, both the few days ahead, a few months ahead, and even the climate projections. So I think this is something which is also a clear hope for us, because with less uncertainty in our models, we'll then be able to undertake more decisive actions to actually reduce the climate impacts. And since people are ready to go for that, I think this is a very good hope for us. And finally, there is now more and more collaboration between global institutions and institutions at the local scale. I think this is also something great, because it will build the capacity which is needed to uptake the early warning systems at the local level. So that are my hopes for the next couple of years in terms of early warning systems and early warning actions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gigma. It's fantastic to hear that. And it's fantastic to hear these stories of hope, because I think sometimes when you read into this and you look at some of the materials, it can be quite difficult to see the solutions and the positivity. So it's been fantastic to hear those. If I can just signpost people to the flood resilience portal, the Zurich flood resilience portal, there's a massive library documents on there with evidence, blogs, working papers, practical reports and research on the impacts of flooding. And there will be quite a lot more to come on heat as we move into multi-hazard approaches within Zurich. But Dorothy, maybe I'll pass back to you for the last few minutes, and maybe you can just tell us, what are your kind of hopes for the future? I know you've done a huge amount of thinking and research in this field, and you've pulled together a great panel for today. So what do you hope to happen in the next 12 months or 2 years around anticipatory action? Where's our future? You are our future.
You're putting me on the spot here, everyone. I think it was really interesting to hear everybody's thoughts from the whole spectrum, from like the early warning to the early action. And I think that conversation, linking all of those sections, makes me quite hopeful. I think the idea that, you know, we could have in one virtual room, scientists, humanitarians, people who are bridging the academic and practitioner worlds, kind of thought leaders on all these things in one room, makes me quite hopeful. And I think the fact that we can all, that there is now common language and tools and platforms for these discussions to happen, I think makes me very hopeful as well. And I think my remaining question, maybe, I think we've heard from all 6 of you, this question of trust, like the link between the actual forecast information, the prediction, the monitoring, whatever, to people actually either being able to take action themselves, or for systems being in place to enable early action to actually happen. There's the link there between the warning and the action on this question of trust. And I think we've heard it from Liz, we've heard it from Michael, we've heard it from Gigma as well. And I wonder, maybe just last question, open mic as well, everyone who's still in the room. Yeah, open mic to you all, is how in a changing climate, when we know that new houses are happening, that people are experiencing things maybe more frequently, or new houses that they haven't experienced before, in this like changing climate, in these changing dynamics, how do we ensure that we're still holding the trust of people on this like forecast information and actually enabling them to do stuff in advance? So any bright ideas that you have in the chat would be super helpful. I think it's a question that we're grappling with a lot at the Red Cross as well. But maybe, yeah, open mic, since we have a couple minutes left. Anybody thought about this?
If I may just respond real quickly, just something that has come to my mind, because you talk about trust, between what is provided, the providers and basically the users who are actually using it. I think dialogue and communication, is essential. I mean, there has to be a close link between those that are providing that information and then those that are using it. And then there could be intermediaries also who translate that information. So we need to keep that in mind. So it's not only just provision of that information, like I was telling earlier, and just having it here, use it kind of thing. But you have to make sure that they are part of the solution. They are part, these communities, the users are part. So in that process of co-development of the early warning, and then when you are using it, that trust then builds during that process. And so there will be more action on the ground. Yeah, thank you. I just ended that.
Hey, I wanted to say that I'm, you asked about optimism, and I'm a cynical optimist. I hope things get better. I'm not surprised if they don't, but I keep working at it. And when I use the phrase, when I change the title to earliest warning, earliest action, there's wiggle room to go earlier and to take action earlier. And there are a lot of obstacles from the local level to the institutional to the, science. It's, but I think early warning is fascinating, and I think there's a lot of hope there. The will, not having the will, is a problem. Countries have money but don't have the will. Countries have the will but don't have the money, and how to fix that. So
The existential question, Michael. Emmanuel, you've got your hand up and we've got 2 minutes left. So let's let you have the last say.
Okay, it's a pleasure. I think one critical thing that I want to mention that we've also tried here to have to bridge the trust with the communities is incorporating their views in this entire forecasting and working with the probabilities. There are already community indicators that these people look at along the information. So the question is, how do we make this part of the forecast such that they know that they are part of the forecasters, they are part of those probabilities. So by doing that, we increase on the uptake of this information and also the trust they have in the information, and it has worked for some of the communities that have tried working with the local authorities with the local communities in making predictions and also incorporating some of that.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Some wise words to wrap up with. So can I just say thank you to our panelists for joining. I know that many of you are joining at very antisocial times in your day. So huge thanks for being engaged, and to everybody for dialing in. I know it's a very busy time at COP. You've got lots of different choices to join, lots of sessions. Dorothy's got a few more sessions on early warning, early action within the Development and Climate Days. So please have a look on the platform and attend those other sessions. There's also an opening session coming up later this morning, and then a big wrap up tomorrow night. So you're very welcome to join any of those. We will find a way to post all of the slides, and we'll put something up on Twitter, maybe with the hashtag for DNC Days, so you can find your way back. And the recording of this will also be on the platform quite soon. So have a good rest of your days, everybody. Good luck with all of your fantastic work. Thank you for your commitment. Keep going, and